Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. So speaking of search, not exactly, but sort of, Mike, you wanted to talk about the new Yext Data Hub that was launched earlier this week, or maybe late last week, that shows a bunch of data about activity going on their network and Google.
So they released what they call the Search Data Hub at yext.com/search-data-hub. And I just thought it was obviously it integrates Google listings with their network listings, which that part of it, their search network, I looked at that data and couldn't quickly make heads or tails of it.
Well, that's a bunch of third-party apps and directory sites.
And it just didn't make sense. But the Google data is interesting because they have data on 678,000 businesses in the United States, 580,000, I think it was. And they track the data that comes out of the GMB insights, which, in and of itself isn't totally accurate, but it's directionally accurate. And you can see this over a time frame from the beginning of 2019 to the current time. And it's presented in what I find to be a relatively simple interface that allows you to define the time period, look at particular countries, define verticals, and understand what's happening in Google across the board. So what I thought was interesting was when I went into the United States only and looked at like clicks or queries rather. Hang on, let me bring it up.
Shouldn't you have done this ahead of time?
Yeah, I did, but it blew my screen away. So I looked at clicks, and clicks have largely returned, like driving directions have largely returned to 2019 levels, for example, in the United States. And clicks on phone calls are ahead of 2020 and 2019, and website clicks are ahead of both years. So, and you can see that the bulk of this has happened in the last 3 or 4 months.
Coinciding with the reopening of the economy.
Coinciding with the reopening after a year of month-over-month declines in driving direction. So it shows that and shows you across phone calls, across websites, and then, a similar piece of data for, queries as well. So you can get a sense of what's happening by vertical. And I just think it's useful because it's a good summary of the data that we can see broadly what's happening.
Well, so just to put you on the spot a second, what would be like a practical use case for a digital marketer, for example?
One, it'll allow you to see, again, the Google data is a little bit screwy, things like impressions, but click-through rates are valuable to see whether, for example, during COVID, a lot of website traffic went up and driving directions went down. So we can now see whether driving directions are going to replace those website visits or whether the website visits are going to stay high. So we can get a sense of where people are going to be converting. I mean, if you determine that people are converting more back to Google as opposed to the website, then it would change where you make your efforts, put your efforts. And I think it's just of interest, both economically and to the industry, to surface this data.
Sure, more data is bit better than less.
I think it's really
to the data.
I think it's very interesting. So first of all, hats off to the product marketer at Yext or the team that came up with this concept. It's something that we built an initial version of at ThriveHive that I don't think ThriveHive is maintaining any longer. It was specific to GMB, so not across an entire network, which we didn't have, which Yext does. I think it's a really valuable resource. I think it highlights something that, Mike, you and I have been talking about for years, just in terms of the dominance of GMB as a lead source. So I was just playing around with this just today and noticed that their average location in their network gets something like 800 or 900 actions on GMB in a given month. if you add up driving directions, phone calls, and website visits. And in whatever they define as a long tail network, that same number of clicks is like 90. So Google is 10 to 1 over their long tail, whatever that long tail metric is. And I think that speaks to just how dominant GMB has become and adds real data to that story that you and I have been trying to get out there.
Well, it also in a certain weird, ironic way adds fuel to the long tail network doesn't matter anymore argument that, Mike, you have been a big proponent of. I mean, at Uberall, we did find that there was value, there was ranking value to having the broader distribution, but this data adds more ammunition to the anti listings management argument. It seems to me.
Yeah,
I don't disagree, but I would like a little more definition on how they're defining long tail and what's going into these metrics exactly.
Yeah,
but
I think there's two separate questions, like where are the consumers congregating, and does the long tail have any relationship to ranking on Google? And the prominence factor suggests that it does. The study we did suggests that still exists. But in terms of consumer traffic, it's not happening outside of a very few number of places.
Right.
Which goes back to
suggests do a good enough job with your long tail stuff and put all of your marketing energy into making a really powerful GMB listing with photos and links to appointments and good reputation management on Google. That's the argument I've been trying to make, is not that the other stuff, is completely irrelevant, but people are not focusing their time and budgets accordingly relative to the upside.
Which seems to me, I mean, maybe I've just heard this too many times and been too close to it, but it just seems to me that that's kind of a self-evident thing at this point, what you just said. That people need to really focus on Google My Business, but maybe it's not.
So just from an Uberall / Yext standpoint, I don't even know what the rack rate is for an annual subscription, right? But let's say I'll just use $100 just as a sort of easy number to latch onto.
I think it's negotiable. Is the reality.
Yeah. So if that's the case for the sort of cost of the listing on the network, to me that would suggest, okay, well, I should be spending $1,000 a year on great photos or a really good reputation manager, like on a salary basis, just devoted to GMB. If that's the investment you're going to make in a long tail listing distribution at $100, you should be spending 10x that on just GMB.
Yeah.
Right. And an example of that, Greg, I'm involved in consulting for Air.cam, who's pushing this local photography. And what we're seeing across brands is complete obliviousness to their local photography. And when we switch the photography out and we compare in-market performance with great photography versus not, we're seeing massive ROI. Which is huge. So that's it should be a given, it isn't.
Well, no, the photography thing I think is a more complicated, subtle point in a certain way, because maybe, but so quick follow up question on that. So there's the idea of consumers responding more to better photographs, better images, and then there's the idea of the algorithm and Google responding to that. Are you making any distinction between those?
I hesitate to go there. Everybody wants that. To me,
everybody wants you to go there.
Everybody wants me to go there. There's enough positive.
Go there, Mike. Go.
There's enough positive uplift that it doesn't matter how it happens.
There you go. There you go.
I mean, we're seeing, just greater click-throughs, greater exposure, everything. So whether it's happening because more people are clicking, or whether it's happening,
click-throughs are a function of visibility, which is a function probably of the the algorithm that's rewarding good photography on some level, right?
Right. And delivering photographs that meet the query intent seems to help, right?
So interestingly, now Moment Feed was acquired by Uberall, of course, and I couldn't say anything when we were having that initial discussion. But Moment Feed has been using AirCam, and they said that they're getting really positive responses from customers from that.
Right.
So, we have to sort of break away from this little incestuous moment here, and
I'll just say at Thrive 5 we certainly found anecdotal data from our clients who we advised on photography on GMB that they saw, the metrics, a lot of the same metrics that Yext is tracking, showed a similar increase from just a little more care and attention paid to their photos, even if they weren't professionally shot or, on point with respect to the subject matter of the photos. So I just use that as one example, though. I think there's plenty of other elements of GMB to optimize, and I think it's radically undervalued given this discrepancy of where consumer eyeballs are versus the rest of local search. So
just one quick anecdotal point before we move on to your item about content pruning, which is I've got to put a new roof on my house. This is a real world situation, and I'm using Google and Yelp are the two, right? So Google for some initial data set. What you don't like Yelp? You're saying?
I don't. I mean, I do not think that you can find a reliable service provider using search. I just think that the flaws, the intrinsic flaws, create such a unreliable.
Oh,
result.
actually, I have to amend that. So we use Nextdoor, Google, and Yelp, and
Okay.
the one that we ultimately chose, we initially found on Nextdoor based
Right.
on their recommendations.
And that makes sense to me, that you start with a recommendation and work from there.
Yeah,
any
well, you validate
high-stress
with
category.
reviews. Yeah, you
Right.
validate with reviews. I mean, this is we weren't going to talk about Nextdoor today, but this is why Nextdoor has such an opportunity that they may not be able to fully capitalize on. But we'll leave that for another day.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.